there, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing 5 things that I've noticed when comparing working in the US to working here in the UK. Now, let's start off with a little bit of background. I moved to the UK in 2017 under a skilled worker visa. So I have a bachelor's in social work and a master's in clinical social work or mental health social work. And I also have a master's in public administration with a concentration in public policy. So I have primarily worked in government and also healthcare. And I've done this work for almost 20 years, and it's insane when I say that out loud. So the lens of this discussion is going to be from someone that is a skilled worker that has a lot of experience both working in the US and here in the UK. So let's start off with number 1. So I am employed full-time. Back home when I lived in the US, I was also employed full-time. And with the annual leave entitlement here in the UK, you'll hear people say 20 plus 8 or 28 days of annual leave. What they're talking about is that you are entitled to 20 days of annual leave plus 8 days of bank holidays or national holidays. And together that totals 28 days. So from the day that you start your job, you are entitled to 28 days of leave. And not only that, not only are you entitled to the 28 days of leave, you are encouraged to take time off and take a break from your work. Now, British folks, you Brits, y'all gonna take your holiday. The flight is booked, the Eurostar is booked, the out of office email is turned on, okay? Get somebody else to do it. And before I moved here, I have never been encouraged to take time off and to take space and time away from work, ever. And I have worked in the nation's capital, I've worked in the DC and surrounding areas, I've worked in the deep south, I've worked in Texas and the Carolinas, and I have never been encouraged to take time off. So that is one of the main differences that I've noticed since I moved here. And I'm going to share some screens with you to get into this in more detail. So it says almost all people classed as workers are legally entitled to 5.6 weeks paid holiday a year, known as statutory leave entitlement or annual leave. This includes agency workers. Agency workers are contractors. Workers with irregular hours, where the numbers of hours they work in a pay period often or always changes. It goes on to state, most workers who work 5-day weeks must receive at least 28 days paid annual leave a year. This is the equivalent of 5.6 weeks of holiday. I'll link this in the description if you're just curious and want to look into this by yourself. So this outlines in further detail what I already mentioned, that this is a statutory guidance from the federal government. And this is in their employment laws where you are entitled to your leave. Next, I'm going to share some screens about entitlement and paid time off in the US so we can compare and contrast the differences. Department of Labor in the United States. So this is the federal government agency that provides oversight to employment and labor laws. What are the main types of paid leave? Paid family and medical leave. Paid family and medical leave refers to policies that enable workers to receive wage replacements when they take extended time off from work for qualifying reasons such as bonding with a new child, recovering from their own serious health condition, or caring for a loved one with a serious health condition. While many workers are entitled to take unpaid leave under FMLA, or the Family and Medical Leave Act, there is currently no federal law providing or guaranteeing access to paid family and medical leave for workers in the private sector. However, some states have their own paid leave programs and requirements. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, since moving here in the UK, I have been encouraged to take time off of work and use my annual leave. This article that I am sharing with you now is from the Pew Research Center, and the article is entitled, "More than 4 in 10 US workers don't take all their paid time off. Some 46% of US workers who receive paid time off from their employer, whether for vacation, doctor's appointments, or minor illnesses, take less time than they are offered, according to a recent Pew Research Center survey. Upper income workers are more likely than middle and lower income workers to say they take less time off than offered. So I'm going to link this as well in the description box. And so what this survey is showing is that I think the difference that's being highlighted is that there is a difference in work culture. Here in the UK and the wider Europe, you want to work, everybody encourages you to work, but they also understand that there has to be a balance, that burnout is a real thing, and if you do not take time off to rest and recuperate and then come back to work feeling like re-energized, that you are going to just be, first of all, you're going to be grumpy as hell. Don't nobody want to be around you. And are you going to be an effective employee? It's questionable. And in the US, what I notice is that it's not even that you're not encouraged to take time off. There is a perception, there is a negative perception that is correlated to people that take time away from work. They are often viewed as like a bit lazy. They are viewed as not working as hard. And until that sort of culture changes, I don't feel like the numbers that are reflective in this survey by the Pew Research Center is going to change. Now, let's move on to number 2. Another major difference between working in the US and working in the UK is healthcare. So healthcare in the US is mostly privatized. And not only that, your healthcare is linked to your employer. So in my experience, my employer would have like a large health insurance like Aetna or United Healthcare. And then I would then have the option to sign up for specific health insurance that I requested, whether it's dental care or other specialist healthcare. And the cost is dependent on your specific needs and if you have a family, if you have a spouse, if you have children, and things of that nature. So what you'll find is that people may have wanted to change jobs or even maybe like move out of state, but they always have to consider what were their healthcare options because it's linked to your work. Here in the UK, that's not a worry because of the NHS. Now, the NHS is in shambles. We're not going to even like try and play around. The wait list is outrageous, but be that as it may, there is still a universal healthcare system that is not linked to your work. So whether you work or not, you still have access to go to a dentist, to go to a doctor, and you're paying £0. There is zero out-of-pocket expenses to visit your, they call it here, GP. Back home, we'll say to go to the doctor's office. And healthcare back home, you are nickeled and dimed for everything. Even if you're just like, oh, I feel like a little bit, something going on with my throat, I'm not really sure. When you go to the doctor's office just to get like a general triage sort of assessment to figure out what's going on, you have to pay for that visit. And it costs more if you are seeing a specialist. So as a grown-ass woman, if I needed to go to a OBGYN, for example, that would cost me more than going to like a general medical doctor. And so that is another major difference between working in the US and the UK is that having your healthcare linked to your employment is problematic, to say the least, because you'll find that a lot of workers like stay in roles that they don't necessarily want to do, but you need healthcare, so you're in a conundrum. And the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is not universal healthcare, and it's too messy for me to go into it now, but I will put a link in the description box if you're curious, so you can look into that for yourself. So another that I've noticed is the amount of hours that you work. So back home in the US, to be considered employed full-time, a full-time worker, you have to work 40 hours per week. Here in the UK, to be considered a full-time employee, you have to work a minimum of 35 hours or more. So since I've moved here, all of my employment contracts have contracted me to work 37.5 hours per week. And with that being said, whether it's here in the UK or back home in the US, I've always worked longer than I'm contracted to work, as most of you have, just to try and stay on top of your work. But because the full-time employment hours, how many hours you have to work a week to be considered full-time, is less here in the UK, I find that I work less since I moved here. So let's move on to number 3. Money, 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 money. Don't nobody work for free. I for damn sure don't work for free. And the difference in the amount of money you make, when I think about the time that I've worked in the US when compared to the time here in the UK, there is a few differences. So like I stated earlier in the video, I have primarily worked in government and healthcare. There is a different financial incentive structure when you compare public service or government working compared to the private sector. The private sector, you have bonuses and all types of financial incentives that are innate to that type of work that you do not have when compared to like government working. And even with that being said, in the roles that I've had here as a permanent employee, I have made less money when I compare to doing similar roles back home in the US. Not only that, we've already briefly talked about there's a different incentive, financial incentive structure comparing private sector to public sector. Be that as it may, every year when I was living in America and I had my annual review, where you and the team manager, your line manager, go over, things that you've accomplished during the course of the year, maybe trainings that you've completed that then helps increase your knowledge, skills, and ability as a worker, all of those things. When you're going over all of that, every year when I've had my appraisal back home, I have gotten a pay increase. And not just a cost of living increase. I've gotten a merit-based increase that is tied to the work that I have done, and I'm able to show how I have, pushed numbers or whatever the case may be. Here in the UK, I have never been given an increase after receiving an appraisal. The only way that I have been able to increase my money and how much I'm earning is by resigning and going and getting another job. And to me, that is problematic. So the way in which you can make more money is by being a contractor. And when I compare the times that I have worked as a contractor here in the UK to back home in the US, I have made more money as a contractor here in the UK. So you can make up the margins there, but at the same time, you don't have the same sort of job stability. And normally, when I've taken on contract roles, it starts off at 3 months and then it's reviewed, and you can choose to extend it for another 3 months. Or your employer can choose to rescind that. So it just depends on the role, because sometimes the contract role is a short-term cover for somebody that may be on maternity leave, or that's on leave because they're recovering from surgery or something like that. And so you already walk into the role knowing that, okay, I'm only going to be here for 8 weeks or whatever the case may be. But that is the main difference, is permanent roles in the US, I found that I have been paid more. In contract roles here in the UK, I have been paid more. So number 5, last but not least, is, now this is anecdotal evidence. I do not have any hard data or stats on this. This is just my perception. In my opinion, I feel like it's easier to get laid off from your job in the US than compared to here in the UK. Now, I'm not advocating for anybody to lose their jobs. The cost of living is high and times are hard. So I don't want nobody to lose their jobs. But sometimes, folks, you got to go. You're not doing a good job and you got to go. So the only time that I have been fired, I was 18 years old. I was a freshman in college at the Bowie State University, located in Bowie, Maryland. And I was working at the Gap. And I deserved to get fired. Let's start there. Them folks should have fired me. And what I was doing is they had me working nights on the weekends. So they would have me work like Friday night and Saturday night. And the Alphas got a party on Friday night. And the Qs is having a party on Saturday night. So how can I go to the frat party if I'm down to the Gap folding t-shirts and jeans? I can't be at both places at once. So I used to be calling out sick. I'm like, I can't make it today. I'm under the weather. I'm feeling it. And I would do that like every week because the Qs and the Alphas is having parties every week. And I got to be at the party. And them folks definitely fired me. They were just like, they didn't even give me no explanation. They was just like, girl, bye. And from what I've seen here in the UK, I have observed, and I don't know, and this is why it's anecdotal and not like hard evidence. I have seen people frequently call out. Now, I don't know if they're having discussions with their line manager and the higher ups and all of that, but I have seen and observed things where I'm like, back home, child, you be packing your bags. You be packing your stuff in a box and heading home. And I'm going to share a screen with you that goes into this a little bit more. But I feel like it is harder to let go of your job here in the UK than compared back home in the US. And like I mentioned earlier about paid time off, I think if you think about it, that is part of the reason why folks may not be taking time off, because they are worried about there being a perception that they are not showing up to work enough, that they are not working hard enough, and that indeed will lead to them being laid off. Now, again, we ain't got no data on this. This is just me trying to make sense of things that I've observed. So let me share this screen with y'all. This blog post from justworks.com that explains at-will employment in the U.S. So like in the example that I gave when I was working at the Gap and them folks fired me, this goes into how they were able to do it without giving me any sort of explanation or nothing. So it says, what is at-will employment? At-will employment is a term used to describe an employment relationship between an employer and an employee. With at-will employment, either party can terminate the employment at any time for any reason without any legal consequences. This means that an employer can fire an employee without giving a reason, and an employee can quit without giving a reason. However, there are some exceptions to this rules, which we'll touch on later. It goes on to states. Which states follow at-will employment? At-will employment is the default employment model in 49 out of 50 states in the U.S. Montana is the only state that does not follow at-will employment. In Montana, employers must have a valid reason for terminating an employee, and employees can only be fired for just cause. For all other states, employers and employees alike can in most cases terminate employment for any reason. So when I was working at the Gap in Bowie Town Center, them folks did not legally have to give me an explanation as to why I got fired. They just basically said, girl, go head on and bye. And even though I knew that the reason why is because I kept calling out on the weekends, but they did not have to give me an explanation, and they did not. And that's because 49 out of the 50 states in the United States are at-will employers. Now let's take a look at the UK. This is from gov.uk about dismissing staff. It says, dismissal is when you end an employee's contract. When dismissing staff, you must do it fairly. there are different types of dismissal: fair dismissal, unfair dismissal, constructive dismissal, wrongful dismissal. Fair and unfair dismissal. A dismissal is fair or unfair depending on your reason for it, how you act during the dismissal process. Constructive dismissal. This is when an employee resigns because you've breached their employment contract. This can be a single serious event or a series of less serious events. An employee could claim constructive dismissal if you cut their wages without agreement, unlawfully demote them, allow them to be harassed, bullied, or discriminated against, unfairly increase their workload, change the location of their workplace at short notice, make them work in dangerous conditions. A constructive dismissal is not necessarily unfair, but it would be difficult for you to show that you breach. Let me read that over again. A constructive dismissal is not necessarily unfair, but it would be difficult for you to show that a breach of contract was fair. A constructive dismissal might lead to a claim for wrongful dismissal. Wrongful dismissal is where you break the terms of an employee's contract in the dismissal process. For example, dismissing someone without giving them proper notice. Wrongful dismissal is not the same as unfair dismissal. If an employee thinks you've dismissed them unfairly, constructively, or wrongfully, they might take you to an employment tribunal. And so, because of that, because of how the UK employment laws are set up, it's my opinion that employers are like really hesitant to let staff members go unless it's like grossly something flagrant, like being violent in the workplace. If it's something that has to do with competency or things that are like harder to prove, I feel like they just won't fire you. And it's because of how like detailed everything is in their employment laws. Now, I am a member of a union, shout out to GMB, and I have gotten some great advice from them when I have had issues with my with any employer that I've had. So if you have access to a union, I would highly advise that you pay your monthly union dues. So you got, a team behind you to help represent you if there's some fool-la line going up at your job. Drop down in the comments and let me know what you think about the differences that I've outlined between working in the US and working in the UK. And make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Monday, and I'll see y'all next.